What's the one thing you should never reveal to an avoidant if you want them to stick around? Have you ever casually mentioned something to your avoidant partner, maybe during a normal conversation, maybe while you're both relaxed and comfortable, and suddenly the energy shifts? They don't argue or get upset. They just disconnect, like a switch flipped somewhere inside them. And then you make the fatal mistake. You let them know that you see something in them they don't see in themselves. You hint that you believe they're capable of more emotional connection than they're currently showing. What makes avoidance vanish isn't what most people expect. It's not about being too clingy or needy. It's not about moving too fast or talking about the future. It's not even about saying, "I love you" at the wrong time. The thing that sends avoidance running is when you admit you're waiting for them to change. But to an avoidant, this translates to something completely different. They hear that their current self isn't enough, that you're tolerating who they are now while hoping for someone different later, that your acceptance comes with conditions attached. When you mention that you know they'll open up eventually, they hear pressure wrapped in nice words. When you say you can see the real them underneath their walls, they think you're saying their current self isn't good enough. When you hint that you understand why they're guarded and believe they'll let you in when they're ready, they feel like a broken thing you're trying to fix. The worst part about admitting you're waiting for them to change is how reasonable it sounds. You're not demanding anything. You're not giving ultimatums. You're just being patient and understanding while they work through their issues. But that's exactly what makes it so deadly. Think about it from their perspective. Someone is basically saying, "I like you enough to stick around, but not enough to accept who you are right now." They're hearing that your love comes with a countdown timer. You'll wait, but only until your patience runs out. When you tell an avoidant you're waiting for them to become more open, you're putting them in an impossible spot. They can't stay exactly how they are because that disappoints you. But they also can't change because that means admitting their natural way of being is wrong. And here's the thing. Most avoidants don't actually want to change. They like being independent. They're comfortable with emotional distance. They've built their whole identity around not needing anyone too much. When you suggest they should become different, you're attacking the core of who they think they are. It's like telling someone who's naturally quiet that you're waiting for them to become the life of the party. Even if they tried to do it, it wouldn't be authentic. They'd be putting on an act to keep you happy, and everyone involved would know it's fake. The moment you admit you're waiting for an avoidant to change, you stop being their partner and become their personal improvement project manager. You start watching their behavior differently. You look for signs they're making progress. You get excited when they share something personal and disappointed when they pull back. They can feel you monitoring them. They know you're keeping score. Every interaction becomes a test. Are they being open enough? Are they showing enough vulnerability? Are they meeting your expectations for emotional growth? This turns their natural personality into something they have to perform or apologize for. Instead of just being themselves, they're constantly wondering if they're being avoidant enough to frustrate you or open enough to satisfy you. Let me give you an example of how this plays out in real life. You're dating someone who doesn't talk much about their feelings. Instead of accepting that this is just how they communicate, you start making comments like, "I know you'll feel comfortable sharing more with me eventually," or "I can tell you want to open up, you just need time." Now every conversation becomes loaded. When they don't share something personal, they feel like they're failing your expectations. When they do share something, they wonder if it was enough or if you're still waiting for more. They can't just talk to you normally anymore because every word is being measured against your hopes for their emotional development. The really messed up part is that your patience actually creates more pressure than direct demands would. At least with demands, they know exactly what you want and can choose to say yes or no. But with this waiting game, the expectations are unclear and the timeline is indefinite. They don't know what kind of change would be enough to satisfy you. They don't know how long you'll actually wait before getting frustrated. They don't know if the person you're hoping they'll become is even someone they want to be. This uncertainty is exhausting. It's easier to just disappear than to live under the constant worry that they're not becoming the person you want them to be fast enough. When you tell an avoidant you see potential in them that they're not showing, you're basically saying their current self is just a rough draft. You're treating who they are right now like it's temporary, like it's something they'll grow out of once they get their act together. But what if this is just who they are? What if their way of handling emotions and relationships isn't a phase or a defense mechanism, but their actual personality? What if they don't want to become more emotionally expressive because they genuinely prefer keeping things private? Your waiting sends the message that you don't believe their current way of being is valid or mature. You're implying that emotional distance is always a problem that needs solving, that independence is always fear in disguise, that anyone who doesn't share their feelings freely must be damaged somehow. This is incredibly insulting, even when you mean it kindly. You're essentially telling someone that their natural personality is wrong and needs to be fixed before they can be worthy of love. And here's something most people don't realize. When you're waiting for someone to change, you're not actually present in the relationship you're currently in. You're mentally living in some future version where they've become who you want them to be. This means you're not really seeing them, appreciating them, or connecting with them as they actually exist right now. You're relating to the potential version in your head more than the real person in front of you. Avoidants can sense this disconnect. They know you're not fully there with them because you're too busy imagining how things could be different. This makes them feel like they're not enough to hold your attention as they are, which pushes them even further away. The waiting game also puts them in debt to you emotionally. You're doing them this big favor by being patient with their issues. You're sacrificing your own needs to give them time to grow. Now they owe you something. They owe you progress, improvement, transformation. This debt feels suffocating because they never asked you to wait. They never promised to change. They never said they wanted to become more emotionally open, but now they're responsible for justifying your patience and rewarding your faith in them. When the pressure gets too intense, disappearing starts to look like the only way out. They can't become the person you're waiting for because that person doesn't exist. They can't stay exactly how they are because that disappoints you. So they leave rather than continue failing to meet expectations they never agreed to. The thing about waiting for someone to change is that it requires you to reject who they actually are. You might think you're being accepting, but you're really saying, I accept you conditionally, as long as you're working toward becoming someone different. Real acceptance means liking someone's personality as it exists right now, not as you hope it might develop later. It means finding their natural way of handling emotions attractive, not seeing it as something that needs improvement. If someone's emotional style doesn't work for you, the honest response is to find someone whose style does work, not to hang around hoping this person will transform into someone more compatible. When you admit to an avoidant that you're waiting for them to change, you're telling them that who they are isn't enough. You're saying you can only love them fully once they become different. You're making your acceptance contingent on their willingness to abandon parts of themselves that feel essential to their identity. This is why they vanish, not because they don't care about you, but because they can't handle the pressure of constantly trying to become someone they're not, in order to earn love they thought they already had. But there's something even more damaging that happens when you reveal you're waiting for change. You accidentally teach them that their natural way of being is a problem that needs solving. You confirm every doubt they've ever had about whether they're capable of being in a healthy relationship. Most avoidants already struggle with feeling like they're fundamentally different from other people in a bad way. They watch their friends fall in love easily, share their feelings openly, and build intimate connections without all the internal resistance they experience. They wonder if there's something wrong with them that makes relationships feel so complicated and overwhelming. When you tell them you're waiting for them to become more emotionally available, you're basically confirming their worst fears about themselves. You're agreeing that yes, there is something wrong with how they handle relationships. Yes, they do need to be fixed before they can be lovable. This confirmation hits them like a punch to the gut because it comes from someone whose opinion matters to them. If a stranger called them emotionally unavailable, they could dismiss it. But when someone they care about essentially agrees that their personality needs improvement, it validates every insecurity they've been carrying. The damage goes deeper than just hurting their feelings. You're actually reinforcing the shame they feel about their natural emotional style. You're teaching them that independence is selfish, that emotional distance is wrong, that their way of loving isn't good enough. This shame becomes toxic because it makes them hate parts of themselves that aren't actually harmful. There's nothing inherently wrong with being more reserved emotionally. There's nothing broken about preferring independence. There's nothing that needs fixing about having boundaries around vulnerability. But when someone they love is disappointed in these traits, they start seeing their natural personality as a character defect. They begin to believe that who they are at their core is incompatible with being loved. Here's what makes this particularly cruel. You're not just rejecting their current self, you're also rejecting their right to be different from you. You're saying that your way of handling emotions is the right way and their way is something that needs to be corrected. This creates a power imbalance where your emotional style becomes the standard they're expected to meet. Your need for openness becomes more important than their need for privacy. Your timeline for intimacy becomes the pace they're supposed to match. When you position yourself as the patient one who's willing to wait for them to grow, you're also positioning them as the broken one who needs time to catch up to your level of emotional maturity. This dynamic is incredibly demeaning, even when you don't mean it that way. They start feeling like a child who's disappointing a parent, like a student who's failing to meet their teacher's expectations, like a patient who's not responding well to treatment. None of these roles feel good in a romantic relationship. The waiting also creates a timeline pressure that makes everything worse. Even though you're not giving them a specific deadline, they know your patience isn't infinite. They know that eventually you'll get tired of waiting and either give them an ultimatum or leave. This invisible countdown clock makes them panic about their progress. They start trying to force themselves to be more open, more vulnerable, more emotionally expressive. But forced vulnerability isn't real vulnerability, it's performance. And both of you can tell the difference. When they try to speed up their emotional development to meet your timeline, everything they share feels fake and calculated. They're not opening up because they feel safe. They're opening up because they think they have to in order to keep you. This performance exhausts them because it requires constant effort to be someone they're not. They can't just relax and be themselves because themselves isn't good enough for you. They have to stay in character as the version of themselves you're hoping they'll become. The performance also makes them resentful because they're doing all this emotional work not for their own growth, but to meet someone else's expectations. They're changing not because they want to, but because they feel like they have to in order to be loved. Eventually, the resentment and exhaustion build up until disappearing feels like the only way to get relief. They can't keep pretending to be someone they're not, and they can't go back to being someone you've already said isn't enough. There's another aspect of this that most people don't consider. When you tell an avoidant you're waiting for them to change, you're also telling them that you don't trust their judgment about themselves. You're saying that you know better than they do about what kind of person they should be. This is incredibly presumptuous. Who are you to decide that their natural level of emotional expression needs improvement? Who are you to determine that their way of handling relationships is wrong? Who are you to set the standards for what counts as enough openness? Your assumption that they need to change implies that you've done some kind of assessment and found them lacking. You've evaluated their personality and decided it doesn't meet your requirements for a healthy relationship. But they never asked for your evaluation. They never requested your feedback on their emotional availability. They never signed up to be graded on their capacity for vulnerability. When you appoint yourself as the judge of their emotional development, you're overstepping boundaries in a way that feels invasive and controlling. You're treating them like a project instead of a person, like a problem instead of a partner. This dynamic also puts you in a position of superiority that's toxic for any relationship. You get to be the emotionally mature one who's graciously helping the emotionally stunted one grow up. You get to be the patient teacher guiding the slow student toward enlightenment. But relationships are supposed to be between equals, not between a mentor and their project. When you take on the role of waiting for someone to change, you automatically put yourself above them in the relationship hierarchy. This superior position might feel good for your ego, but it's devastating for genuine connection. They can't be vulnerable with someone who sees them as emotionally inferior. They can't trust someone who thinks their natural way of being needs correction. The power imbalance also makes them feel like they can't express any dissatisfaction with the relationship because they're supposed to be grateful that you're sticking around despite their issues. They can't complain about your behavior because you're doing them a favor by being patient with their emotional limitations. This silences legitimate concerns they might have and prevents honest communication about relationship dynamics. They end up walking on eggshells around you because they don't want to seem ungrateful for your patience or prove that they really are too difficult to love. When avoidants realize they're in this kind of unequal relationship, where their partner sees them as a fixer-upper rather than a complete person, they often decide it's better to be alone than to live under that kind of judgment. They'd rather have no relationship than have one where they're constantly falling short of someone else's vision of who they should be. They'd rather be single than spend their life trying to earn acceptance that should have been freely given from the beginning. The tragic irony is that your desire to help them become more emotionally available actually drives them further away from emotional availability. Your patience becomes pressure. Your understanding becomes condescension. Your love becomes conditional. By the time they disappear, they're not just leaving you. They're escaping a relationship that made them feel fundamentally flawed for being who they naturally are. What makes this whole situation even more complicated is how society teaches us that love should inspire growth and change. We're told that the right person will make us want to be better, that healthy relationships involve supporting each other's development, that caring about someone means helping them overcome their limitations. So when you express faith in an avoidant's potential to become more open, you think you're being a good partner. You believe you're showing the kind of unconditional support that everyone deserves. You're convinced that your patience and understanding will eventually pay off when they feel safe enough to let their walls down. But avoidants didn't sign up for a relationship with conditions attached. They entered into what they thought was acceptance of who they are, only to discover that your acceptance was actually a trial period where you evaluated whether they were worth keeping as is or whether they needed modifications to meet your standards. This bait and switch feels like betrayal to them. You presented yourself as someone who liked them enough to be with them, then revealed that you actually saw them as a project that needed work. The person they thought accepted them turns out to be someone who was just waiting for them to become acceptable. The timing of when you reveal your expectations for change also makes everything worse. It usually happens after they've already started caring about you, after they've already let some of their guard down, after they've already begun to trust that maybe this time things could be different. When you wait until they're emotionally invested to reveal that you're hoping they'll change, it feels like a trap. Like you deliberately waited until they cared too much to leave easily before showing your true expectations. Like you knew they wouldn't have gotten involved if you'd been upfront about seeing them as someone who needed improvement from the start. This sense of being tricked makes them question everything about the relationship. Were you ever really attracted to who they actually are, or were you just attracted to who you imagined they could become? Did you choose them for their personality, or did you choose them as raw material for your relationship project? These questions eat at them because they realize they may never know the real answers. Even if you swear you loved them exactly as they were, your admission that you're waiting for change proves otherwise. Your actions spoke louder than your words, and your actions said they weren't enough. The doubt this creates extends beyond just your relationship. They start wondering if anyone has ever really accepted them, or if everyone who claimed to love them was actually just seeing potential rather than reality. They question whether their personality is so obviously flawed that everyone who gets close immediately starts planning improvements. This universal doubt makes them want to retreat from relationships entirely. If even the people who claim to care about them can't accept who they are, then maybe the problem really is them. Maybe they really are too damaged, too difficult, too emotionally limited to be worthy of love without major renovations. The shame spiral this creates can last for years after the relationship ends. Every time they consider opening up to someone new, they remember how their natural way of being was met with disappointed patience instead of genuine acceptance. Every time they think about being vulnerable, they remember how their emotional style was treated like a character flaw that needed correction. This is why telling an avoidant you're waiting for them to change doesn't just end the current relationship. It often damages their ability to trust future partners. You're not just rejecting them, you're teaching them that rejection is inevitable once people see who they really are. But here's something that might surprise you. Many avoidants actually want deeper connections. They're not emotionally unavailable because they don't value intimacy. They're cautious about intimacy because they've learned that wanting it makes them vulnerable to exactly this kind of conditional acceptance. When you tell them you're waiting for them to change, you're confirming their worst fear about relationships, that people will use their desire for connection against them. That admitting they want love gives others permission to demand they earn it by becoming someone different. This confirmation reinforces their belief that emotional distance is the safer choice. Why risk being vulnerable with someone who might decide you need improvement? Why open up to someone who might love your potential more than your reality? Why invest in connections that come with invisible contracts for personal development? Your well-meaning patience actually teaches them that their instincts about relationships were correct, that people can't be trusted with their authentic selves, that love always comes with conditions, no matter how nicely those conditions are packaged. The most tragic part is that avoidants often have incredible capacity for loyalty, depth, and commitment once they feel truly safe. But feeling truly safe requires knowing that someone loves them without an agenda for change. It requires experiencing acceptance that doesn't come with a timeline or expectations for growth. When you admit you're waiting for them to become more emotionally available, you eliminate any possibility of that safety. You've revealed that your love is conditional on their willingness to transform, which means they can never truly relax into being themselves with you. Instead of inspiring the change you're hoping for, your admission that you're waiting for change often locks them into the very patterns you want them to move beyond. They become more guarded, not less, more distant, not closer, more convinced that relationships are dangerous, not safer. The irony is devastating. Your patience in waiting for them to open up actually ensures they never will. Your faith in their potential to change becomes the reason they can't risk changing. Your love becomes the thing that prevents them from accepting love. This is why the moment you admit you're waiting for an avoidant to change, you've essentially ended any chance of seeing the natural evolution you were hoping for. You've transformed a relationship into a performance, connection into evaluation, love into a reward system they can never quite figure out how to win. Understanding this doesn't mean you should accept treatment that makes you unhappy. It means recognizing that hoping someone will change for you isn't love. It's trying to customize another person to fit your preferences. If you need more emotional openness than someone naturally offers, the solution isn't to wait for them to develop it. The solution is to find someone who already has the emotional style that works for your needs. Your happiness matters too much to spend it waiting for someone to become a person they may never want to be. And their right to be accepted as they are matters too much for you to make your love conditional on their willingness to change. Have you ever been in a situation where you found yourself waiting for an avoidant to become more emotionally available? I'd love to hear about how that dynamic played out in your experience. Drop a comment below and share your story. Did you recognize yourself in any of these patterns? How did it affect both you and them when you admitted you were hoping they'd change? Your experiences help other people understand they're not alone in dealing with these complicated relationship dynamics. So please, take a moment to share what happened in your situation. I read every single comment and would genuinely love to learn from what you've been through. If this video helped you understand why expressing faith in someone's potential to change can completely backfire with avoidance, hit that like button to help more people find this content. And make sure to subscribe for more insights about relationship patterns that actually work instead of the ones that accidentally push people away. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.